Good evening, Max.
Happy to be here, as always.
Well, Max, tell us a little bit of your perspective on this legislative session, and from your seat as a student and Prism and students that are part of your organization. Tell us about your impressions of what you watched.
Yeah, so as soon as this passed in its first House committee, we were on the ground in this fight. The name of Prism's game really is LGBT inclusive education, and so that was a big part of what we were doing, is educating on what this means. And then personally going up to Tallahassee 3 times. And all in slightly different capacities to, voice our opposition to this legislation and its impact that it will inevitably have on LGBT.
We watched and reported at Queer News Tonight. We reported and showed the protest at the gates at Disney. We showed the hearings in Tallahassee and students' participation. And especially we were moved by the student protests, the plane that flew the banner here in South Florida, and especially at schools like Winter Park High School. And they're chanting "Say Gay" as hundreds and hundreds of students, LGBT and straight allied students. What was your feeling in terms of how students participated in the protests and in the advocacy of what we were watching in this legislative session? How do you think students did?
So I think that this is really a testament to the impact that digital spaces have on young people and the way in which they engage politically. The reason that we're able to see this sort of unified voice among young LGBT people and this sort of grassroots activism among young people is because they're able to organize in a digital space first and be able to educate themselves in a digital space in organizing those sorts of actions on the ground. And that makes that sort of advocacy so much more impactful with that sort of digital know-how and that sort of other arena in which young people are organizing.
I'm curious, Max, for all intents and purposes, let me try to put a fine point on it. We lost. We lost Don't Say Gay. We lost Stop Woke. Sitting today representing Prism and students and other young voices, LGBTQ young voices in Florida, do you have hope that things are going to get better, or are you discouraged?
It's obviously a hard loss, and it's a hard thing to acknowledge that this is a loss. But I honestly wouldn't really call it a loss because this fight still continues. We know that there's inevitably going to be litigation that comes out of this. We know that that there's obviously we're in an election year, and there's some hope on that end, and seeing how young people show up to the polls the way that they showed up to on their school campuses. And I think our biggest battle right now is making sure that we are squashing misinformation, and that's the biggest thing that I have seen, especially in that digital space, is the way in which disinformation has taken hold, especially since our dearest Christina Pushaw decided to make her comments calling LGBT people groomers, which obviously the LGBT community has heard well before I was even alive. And I think that that's super important. I know that some of the biggest disinformation that we've heard is that we haven't read the bill. So I will say right now, classroom instruction by school personnel, or third, next line, parties on gender, on sexual orientation or gender identity may not occur, next line, in kindergarten through grade 3 in a manner that is not age, next line, appropriate or developmentally appropriate for students in, next line, accordance with state standards. It's lines 97 to 101. For the record, it is nowhere around me. I've memorized it. It's ingrained into my retinas.
Excellent.
And what's even more important is understanding what those words mean. And I think that's a big thing. A lot of people who have come into my social media comments and are like, "You've never read the bill." Some of them might have read the bill, but a lot of them don't actually know what these words mean. Sexual orientation is not sex. They're two different things. And our community is much broader than our sex lives and what we're doing in the bedroom. It's all of that sort of disinformation that we're seeing. It's interesting that I keep getting called a groomer when I'm literally a teenager. And to see that sort of just vulgarity directed at young people because they are in this fight. We started seeing this with Greta Thunberg when we had Donald Trump come for her, and we see this every time that young people come into a politically charged space, that they are treated as less than. They're treated as, they're sort of looked down upon, and they're not recognized for the
it's
power.
Very interesting, and you're exactly who are designed. These bills are designed to protect, which is interesting. I'm curious, Max, just for my own edification, before any of this started, had you ever even heard of Anita Bryant?
Oh, yeah. I mean,
oh, you had?
Yeah. I mean, Prism educates on LGBT inclusive education and sexual health resources, and that also includes LGBT history. We do a LGBT History Month campaign on social media every October, and I find the quote. At least it was a fruit pie. Very, very humorous.
Excellent. And for anybody that questions, Max, being a student, he graciously accepted. This is a very, he's sitting in space across from Senator Chevron Jones, the first LGBTQ senator in history in Florida. So it was a very nerve-wracking thing for him. But to prove that he is a student, he agreed to come and participate in our panel about the legislative session. But he made it clear, and we provided some space for him to do it. He had to take an online test.
Yes. I will say, school. I got a 93, which I'm very happy about. And yeah, we're all
exactly.
good.
All right. And before we end with, from a student perspective, we have multiple representatives and y'all at the panel. Any observations of what you saw from students through the process of the legislative session?
I'll tell you that Max and the others who came to our offices, I was moved to tears. And I'll be honest with you, every time I'm asked right now about my thoughts about the Don't Say Gay bill, I move myself out of that equation because I lead with, I'll be fine. It's the young people who came to my office. It was the young people who were out in the hallway who brought me to tears because it reminded me that I didn't have that fight in me when I was a 16, 17-year-old because I was in my own little closet. But when you have students like Max and others who so boldly come to your office and say, "Fight for me," that means something.
Yeah.
And I want to know, just to direct this specifically at Chevron Jones, is, we came into that building, and this was my first time even being in Tallahassee, point blank period, for any reason.
Oh, you had never been to Tallahassee before?
No, not in or out of the Capitol building, nowhere near Tallahassee. And
generally, that's a good thing.
I would say so. But, we came into there and you could feel the hostility. You could feel this sort of energy that we were sort of fruit flies flying around a house plant, that they wanted to sort of shoo out whatever opportunity that they got, which is why it was even more freeing to be able to rally in the rotunda and chant and everything. But coming into the offices of people like Chevron Jones was like this airlock closes and all of that hostility is sort of left out into those main spaces of the Capitol building, and it's just this serene, peaceful feeling of I'm in an affirming space now, and I'm in a space where I feel welcome in my own state's capital.
Yeah, I don't know if we still have Representative Guillermo Smith or Representative Nixon. We do. Any observations from y'all about what you saw from the student perspective this legislative session?
I was so motivated. It was not just the students who were staging walkouts and protests in schools across Central Florida, across the state of Florida, even outside of Florida and other parts of the country. But also so many of the students who were even in the Capitol building. I mean, we have a page and messenger program in the House of Representatives with students from schools around the state. And I had pages who came to me and handed me personally written notes that talked about how important they saw our advocacy in standing up against the Don't Say Gay bill was. They said things like that our speeches and our debates and the way that we opposed the bill didn't just give them inspiration, but it gave them hope for their own future as a queer student and as a queer person. And so I would just remind folks, it doesn't even matter if you're an elected official. You don't have to be an elected official to be an out, proud LGBTQ person who provides inspiration to young people. I mean, in the context of the LGBTQ caucus in the legislature, which is myself, Rep. Rayner, and Senator Jones, sure, we lost the legislative battle, but the way that we came forward to tell our stories from our own queer perspective, based on what I've heard from young people, gave those kids hope. And I think that that's really important, even in the context that we lost the legislative battle.
Yeah, hope is definitely important. And Representative Nixon, any thoughts from you about? Oh, okay, I'm sorry. And Nathan, I know you were going to jump in.
Oh, so a couple of things. And I'll highlight a great moment Senator Jones provided for some of the students that came up. I was up there almost every week, and our department often welcomes lots of student groups, lots of different groups, business groups, chambers, leadership programs. And the senator had created an opportunity for some of the students to go on the floor of the Senate, which, oddly enough, I hadn't done since I was a high schooler coming up, doing speech and debate. And there was this moment then and with a different group when they came into our office, and we sat down and we had a little conversation about what our department does. The engagement and just the excitement and the awe. There were lots of students, it was their first time ever in the Capitol, and it was as though why they were there was gone for just a minute, and there was just like, wow, this is really cool. And we, as you were joking, you don't want folks to go to Tallahassee. I would disagree in my position, and I think some of our electeds might also disagree. We absolutely want them to go to Tallahassee. I want them to feel inspired that we are there, and there aren't that many trans folks working at the Capitol, out trans folks that we know about. And that was also a very unique experience to listen to the rhetoric in committee and on the floor talk about our experiences, much less our bodies, in ways that was abhorrent and triggering and traumatizing. So that beautiful moment with those students being so excited, like when we were 10 or 11 and did the first thing that was exciting, I hope they hold on to that.
And
yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
No.
Point.
I
I mean,
part of that.
I had the pleasure of being in both of those groups. I had a pleasure of being, one of those students that Chevron Jones, I got to take a picture and I got to be in like the center point where you sound really loud and all this other stuff and to be able to go into the Division of Agriculture and Consumer Services as well and that sort of experience and Nate, I've known Nathan previously. Obviously, we've both been on Queer News Tonight together and to be able to have that friendly face as well. There was this moment, like Nathan said, it was this moment where we get the opportunity to not be looked at with that sort of hostility of being looked at like how Donald Trump looks at Greta Thunberg. We get to be looked at like we're kids on a field trip, and we get to see this real awesome skyscraper-sized building with awesome architecture and with and all of these other things, and for a moment we get the brief moment of solace to forget that the people and a significant amount of the people in this building are trying to take away our rights.
I'm curious, Max, with that observation, for you and Prism and other students, last question, that went to Tallahassee, had this experience of really, literally being in the trenches. When you have the opportunity to meet people like the secretary or the commissioner's office or Senator Jones' office or other representatives and different people in Tallahassee, do you think the young attitude among LGBT is that when we get to their age, we're going to do it better? Do you think about that at all?
I think that there is this perception that we are now tasked with fixing a lot of problems that were created by the people who came before us, and it's this unfortunate situation that we're in. Across multiple things beyond LGBT rights. But I think that I value this sort of work that we're able to build off of, especially as someone who has been at the forefront of providing that sort of online education in regards to LGBT history in particular, having that sort of knowledge of the shoulders that I stand on today. And that sort of recognition of, we did not come onto a blank slate here. We are coming after this long, arduous fight that continues today, and we are just another chapter in that, and hopefully a really, really positive one.
I think Maxx needs to run for something. Wasn't that a perfect political answer?
Yeah.
Right?
Wait.
I can't wait either.
I agree. Congratulations to you, Maxx. And I have to say to you, I follow you very closely and encourage you here at Queer News Tonight and with Prism, et cetera. While many of the stories, the reason why we wanted to do this in talking about the legislative session of many of the chapters, as Maxx has just said, of this story of the 63 days, one of the highlights were our youth, which were the exact targets of what we watched in this legislative session. And the Larkins at Winter Park High School, and the student in Flagler Palm Coast that hands out pride flags, and the protest with the handmade signs at Walt Disney World. And of course, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds that went to Tallahassee to voice up was among the best things that we watched through the legislative session. And Maxx, I congratulate you for being one of those voices. Thank you very much for participating with us tonight at Queer News Tonight. LGBTQ plus news is vital for our community and for the broader world as a whole. We have enough enemies at Fox News. Tucker, Sean, and Laura are loud. We need passionate allies. Happening Out Television Network, Queer News Tonight, and It's Happening Out are literally out of the closet and into the headlines. Our community needs your support. Like this broadcast and subscribe now to ensure the growth of the entire LGBT